Go. Hello, Becky. Hello. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Thank you for asking. Welcome. There we go. Welcome to For the Love of Literacy. Becky, do you mind taking a minute to introduce yourself to our audience?
Oh, I'd be happy to. So, I am the president of Bay Area Independent Publishers Association and have been for about 8 years. Sorry, 10 years now. I'm the CEO of Pro Audio Voices, audiobook production, distribution, and marketing. And I also have my own podcast, Audiobook Connection. So, I'm the host of that.
Very cool. Okay. I didn't know. I mean, sometimes you can see on Podmatch when people have their own podcast, but you had like a lot of other things
Yeah.
going on there. So I didn't even see that. How long have you been podcasting?
Let's see. I think I'm at about 190 on a weekly podcast. So, however many years that works out to be.
Okay, whatever. Yeah, I'm not the math person, but you've been doing it for a little while then.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. I've been about 2 years. I think I started, yeah, in the summer, so June,
Yeah.
2 years ago. So, but the tricky part for me is between my seasons of mom and having kids and different things. This is my third season, so I
Yeah.
should actually go and count up the consecutive episodes. But as of now, in this season, you are episode 21.
Awesome. Well,
So
that's a
yeah,
good number.
that's
Yeah.
that's where we're at today. It's a good number.
It is. It is. Yes. And I certainly know about the seasons of mom having, and also the seasons of teaching. So, I've
Okay,
had a lot of years, yeah, with kids.
cool. Okay, well that probably is going to just really enhance our conversation today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. So okay, when you came across my profile on Podmatch, or your team, it was your
Yeah.
team, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, what do you think, like, other than maybe literacy, what stood out to you or them? What made you want to make the connection?
I first of all, even the title of your podcast is a clue to one of the things that would make it immediately appealing. I do love literacy. From the time I was a little kid, I think I wrote my first book as in orange colored pencil on a little tiny notepad when I was probably 6 or something. Um, I always wanted to be an author, and then developed a love for theater, and so it's all come forward in that way. But also, knowing that you're a teacher, that you're a mom, those all just really connect with me as well. Because man, I love kids, and
That is so cool. What a cool background you have then, because um, one thing that just stood out to me is, like, I think, at least with audiobooks, so I have not written a book for adults yet, just for kids, right? But
Mhm.
I have this um, fantasy dream to finish writing a self-help book one day for adults about happiness, joy, how we can kind of live into those intentions in our lives. But I've always wondered, it's really cool when people read their own audiobooks.
Mhm.
And even though I've been told I have a good voice for podcasting, I don't know that I would have a good voice for audiobooks. And it is different. It is
It is.
distinct, which I'm sure you're going to agree.
Yeah.
So that theater background, that theater piece kind of is cool because, and I'll be very frank, there have been those audiobooks that I'm like, oh, this is all the hype, or, I've been waiting to check that out from the library.
Yeah.
And then I get it and I turn it on, and the speaker or the narrator's voice, I'm like dead. I'm like, I cannot listen to 13 hours of this
Yeah.
person. I just
Yeah.
cannot. Or opposite, right? Like, I tune in. Like, right now I'm listening to Gretchen Rubin's Life in the Five Senses. And I
Mm.
love Gretchen Rubin. This is the first audiobook of hers I've listened to, because I usually read her books and mark them up.
Right.
But it has been a delight to listen to her. And she does have a
Yes.
podcast, I think, as well, but her and her sister. But her audiobook voice is just awesome. And it has been a joy to listen to. It
Yeah.
wasn't a long one, it's like 5 or 6 hours, but it's so interesting how that can make or break it.
It is very true. I've had a very similar experience where I found an author that I really liked, and the first audiobook I listened to of her books, I was like, yeah, this is great. I went and got another one of her books. The narrator just killed it for me. I couldn't even I couldn't even get through it. I was like, I can't hear the story.
Yes,
You're
it's
reading
so
me these
true.
words and I can't hear the story. And yeah, so that is very true. And you know that what you said about the podcast voice, the audiobook voice, a lot of a lot of authors come to us and they either feel like they should narrate their own audiobook or maybe they want to. And my first question is always like, well, tell me why you want to narrate your own. Because most often authors have these great writing skills which are not the same at all as, that performance of audio. So
That is
it's
very true. The
always
inflection, the tone,
yeah,
even just the fortitude to get through 10 hours of reading your own book.
right,
Um,
right.
because I know a friend of mine, she put out her second book last year, 2 years ago. She was cracking me up with her everything, her experience in recording, because she was very determined to do her own narration. But she was like, I had to wear a certain kind of clothes so that when I moved, it didn't rustle. And I ate a green apple, so my voice was like, drink tons of water, so my voice was clear and not raspy. And I'm like, I wouldn't have even thought that, because like just growing up reading a passage in class or in
Yeah.
book club or something, I just read it, give it a little inflection, but that's like that little piece, not this huge,
Yeah.
ongoing
You
chapters
know,
upon chapters.
yeah, one of the things I
Mm,
found really interesting, and this I discovered early on when I was when I first started having authors narrate their own audiobooks, and I had a couple trainers. They were professional trainers, great on the stage. Keynote speaker,
right,
lots of energy, and put them in the booth in front of a microphone, and suddenly it was like it went kind of flat or too much. It was like because it's a whole different medium and they just weren't used to it. So, it took a lot of
right.
coaching along the way. Yeah.
Super interesting. So I want to just kind of dive into the rising trend of audiobooks.
Yeah.
Maybe some tips and tricks for recording them too, if you're feeling like, if it leans that way. And then why do you feel like there's just an uptick in the audiobook craze these days? Because it's probably, you can even probably tell me when it happened. It's been a few years now, but
It has been actually over a decade now that we've had double-digit growth in the audiobook world. And there's no sign of it slowing down. And there's still, even as many listeners as we have these days, there's still it's just a portion of
right,
the readers. So I think that there are a lot of things that are playing into that. It's as I think as people discover audiobooks, as they experience good ones, that they find there's a whole other level to it that you don't have with the print or with any text based format.
right.
Um, and there are, some people like to listen while they're multitasking, making dinner, washing the dishes. I like doing that also. Um, and I think there was also, we saw, in addition to just the other steady growth, I think we also saw an uptick in the pandemic years, partly because it's a way that we can get absorbed in a story, be entertained, and not have to have our eyes focused on a screen.
Right.
And that's great for
Eh,
adults and for kids who, ended up having more screen time than most parents would have preferred, you know,
mhm.
when we're having to learn from home. Yeah.
That's for sure. And actually, since I already know now too about your background working with kids, two things there. So one is, yes, a lot of us parents and for teachers prefer not to just rely on screen time.
Right.
But there's also a lot of benefits to listening to audiobooks. So for adults as well as for kids.
Right.
Obviously, like you mentioned, a lot of us as adults, we do multitask a little bit, get some things done. But oh, I love it when I can just. So a lot of times it's still only one, AirPod in at a time, so I can still hear the chaos. But it's usually during baby's nap, so I've only got one or two that I'm listening for. folding the laundry, doing the dishes, because I can't stand to just do the dishes. And maybe I should, right? Maybe I should just soak in that running water sound or the smell of dish soap, but I don't. So I like to, so the only problem comes, I'm also an avid note taker. And usually, this is a funny fact about me, and I don't know if others resonate with this or not, but I tend to listen to more self-help or biographies on
Mhm.
audiobook.
Yeah.
I have listened to, historical fiction, which is my favorite genre, some romance novels, but I find that I prefer that visual for those books, and that I'm a lot better as far as what I take away from the self-help, the biography, the memoirs on
Mhm.
audiobook. So sometimes gotta dry the hands, take a little note, and then go back to whatever.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm a little bit more of a note taker with audiobooks, especially
Mhm.
those self-help ones. But
Mhm.
for kids, let's
Yeah.
return to that for a minute, because I love discussing kids, and it's so funny every week when I publish my podcast. I've used Buzzsprout and Descript, and I my main site is Libsyn, but it will ask me, is this podcast for children? And I'm like, I'm always torn because children can totally tune in,
Yeah.
but obviously it's adults talking about education and literacy foundations. And so I could also see them easily getting bored. And maybe
Yeah.
one day we'll have some kids hop on here. I've interviewed a few young authors or things like that, but
Yeah.
I'm always like, well, it's not for kids, but it's about kids and kids can benefit from it.
Right.
So I know though that's kind of more of a content. Like if someone's browsing, right, and they're like, I want to find a podcast that maybe helps with literacy, or if I've got a kiddo that's not into reading, or I've got a kiddo with some reading or learning disabilities,
Right.
what do I do here?
Right. Right.
So I think all those things are important, but returning to audiobooks for kids, why are audiobooks a good resource for children?
Yeah, I think there's several things. So one is that it actually really helps with fluency, reading fluency,
Yes.
and that is a really great thing. And like not all parents are comfortable with their own fluency, or especially if English is a second language for them. It can be really challenging, and so they may just choose not to read to their children because it's uncomfortable for them. What
Right.
or There are also very busy parents who are just trying to keep it all together and run out of time at the end of the day,
Yep.
and so it's really good for kids to hear stories read fluently. It helps with their own natural fluency. There are also some really wonderful contexts in which having an audiobook as the entertainment can be really valuable. And I think
Mhm.
about especially about things like in the car, when they're strapped in, they have to
Right.
keep themselves somehow their minds are busy, and giving them a story in that way, as opposed to giving them a screen, because
Mhm.
screens, they strain our eyes, they've got their own set of issues that we try to limit screen time for many good reasons.
Right.
The other time is at bedtime, and I've seen this with my own. I have two young granddaughters, and they were having trouble, settling down at one point, and I said, "Well, how about I, you know, read some stories that you can then play for them, and they can choose." And that worked great. So that because then they're trying to settle down. You want to have the lights out. I am a big fan of reading print books right before bedtime.
Yeah.
And but this is, it's another tool, and a real positive entertainment. So I think that kids get a lot of value just as they do from any format of book, but audiobooks have a sort of extra special thing. And and the other thing is that one of the things that's different about audiobooks for kids is that since we don't have those illustrations, which we could think of as an enhancement to the story, instead they can have music and sound effects. So we have like a soundscape that is
Right.
enhancing the story. So it's a different experience,
Hmm.
which is cool. Then it's like, there may be moments depending on the story where it's like identifying the sound of a cow mooing or a dog barking or whatever it might be. Um, that's good in terms of developing those skills of identification, recognition, and yeah, just those oral skills.
For sure. And I think like oral learning, it's so funny when we say that, AURAL, oral learning. When I was teaching fourth grade, it's my third or fourth year, it had finally dawned on me that one of the ways that I could be more successful with a classroom of 30 plus children was to learn their learning intelligence, their emotional intelligence, and their learning profile, how they learned best. And I kind
Mhm.
of grouped them. So some of them, it was all about music. Let me hear the music. Let me look at music, and it clicked. Or it was, I'm a visual learner. I need to see it, or visual or oral, like a combination of the two. Like, let me see the book while it's being read to me.
Yeah.
Or kinesthetic. I'm a mover. I'm a learner, right? That way. And so all those things, but when we talk about oral learning, like it's something I didn't really understand. And maybe that's because I've had to learn to practice better listening skills. It
Mm.
has not come naturally to me. I love to talk. I love to act. I love to dance. I love to be busy. And so, yes, it kind of started like kind of clicking with me. And um, at least one of my children, I feel like, is more of an oral learner. She is very observant. She's not quiet at home, but around people at preschool, at church, in the community. She is observing, she is listening. And it's incredible what she walks away with or what she shares with us. Because I'm like, oh, you got that? Oh, you inferred that because you heard this, and then in your brain made that connection.
Yeah.
And so it's incredible because, again, it's not my strength, it's not my forte. I've even, as an adult, listened to books about how to be a better listener so that here on the podcast, we have a good conversation. It's not one sided. It's me
Yeah.
listening, me restating what you said, me asking questions, and then sitting back. But yeah, it's so interesting, right? With that.
It
And
is. Yeah.
I love what the tips you shared about why audiobooks are good for kids. And I think there can be a lot of good settings for them. On my way out, they were starting to kind of get that surge. On my way out of the classroom, I should say, I was pregnant with my son. I was very sick. And so I early retired. That was my last year teaching when I got pregnant with him. And then we moved, and a lot of things happened. But I had started to really notice the value of audiobooks, or we had like a CD that went with our curriculum, like what the kids would read in class. And now it's incredible what's available. And so there will be audiobooks or podcasts we listen to in the car, like you said, when they're strapped
Yeah.
in, nowhere to go except where we're going, kind
Yeah.
of like just chill. We've also gotten the Yoto player, so it doesn't have a
Mhm.
screen other than this little chip that has like a smiley face when it turns on, and then you put the card in and it
Yeah.
reads the story. I have
Yeah.
those downloaded on my phone so that if you don't have the Yoto player, we have it on my phone and can listen that way. Because during travel, all parents that have young kids and have traveled, sure, we want a tablet, we want screens, but I have seen my children get tired of screens. And when you have
Yeah.
a 6 or 7 hour flight with layovers and a drive,
Yeah.
you need other options. So we have things to play with. And that's one thing I've noticed too is we have like Bun Bun. It's this little bunny that you can change it to songs or fairy tales. And then the Yoto player. My kids will like to listen to that while they play with something. Maybe they're
Yeah.
setting up or staging something that they're listening to.
Yeah.
Also
Yeah.
really good for reading comprehension, right? Because then
Right.
you're listening to Robin Hood, and here you are with, maybe it's counting bears, maybe, I don't know, whatever we have on hand, but you're setting up your own little Robin Hood stage or
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes what I've heard, some of the negative feedback I've heard about audiobooks is that people don't feel like kids are getting as much comprehension with them. And I think it just depends on the kid, what kind of learner they are, and how we're framing that opportunity for them, right?
Right. And even how we're evaluating what they're taking from. So, when you describe that, that maybe playing with the bears, the counting bears while they're, listening to the story, and we we never really fully know what they're processing during that story. So,
Oh,
and it could be anything from, it could be something about relationships. Then is they're going to carry that into, some other context. And we may not recognize what they're taking if what we're measuring only is like facts and figures, that kind of learning,
mm-hmm.
which doesn't, it's not the most important of thing about learning. It's much more important to understand how to learn, and like creative problem solving and relationship things that we can learn so much of that from stories. They're,
Yeah.
yeah, they're just rich with all of that information, and or not just information, but opportunities for exploring different scenarios, for learning about experiences that we haven't had yet. So there's a tremendous value. Yeah.
I and I completely agree with that. I think so, and we'll segue a little bit into this, not and it's not a negative thing. I just want to talk a little bit about the difference between audiobooks and podcasts.
Sure.
So I have a kiddo, my oldest, who has some pretty bad nightmares, night terrors, different things. It just depends, right? Now
Yeah.
that we're entering Halloween season, it's probably gonna be more of the terrors. So it is what it is. I know we'll grow out of it, but we work through it. And one of his favorite things to do, especially because I've got a toddler, so I'm already up with her. I'm busy trying to get her back to sleep. I'm either rocking her, I'm often reading. I lament the loss of my Kindle because now I have like a reading lamp and I'm reading a physical book, but
Hmm.
I left it on an airplane when my daughter was sick and then never got it back. So it's
Oh.
okay, but I do a fair amount of nighttime reading, and so it's just nice for that. But he will then ask, he knows he's responsible for getting himself back to sleep, and he'll ask for either a book, a Froggy book, Pete the Cat. What's another one he really likes? Clark the Shark, or whatever I have on Audible.
Hmm.
Or he'll ask for his Dino podcast, or Dino or Space, right? Either one. What's hard is I feel like, at least from what I've seen with him, because he's heard the audiobooks a lot, he almost relaxes a little bit more. It's like he doesn't feel
Hmm.
like he has to sit up and listen. He can lay in his sleeping bag in my room or go back to his bed and be listening. If he tunes into a podcast, I've noticed that especially if it's new, that he keeps like checking the screen, and
Hmm.
he's really, gears are turning, but it's like 3 or 4 in the morning. So I'm like, in that way, I think I prefer him to listen to an audiobook, something that's
Yeah.
familiar, something that's cozy or funny or whatever, but to help him relax and get, good vibes again.
Yeah.
But what do you feel like, that was just an example, but what do you feel like the pull is for audiobooks versus podcasts for adults or kids, either or both?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think they each offer different things. And so, for kids, that one of the things that is a very common trait of podcasts is that we want to keep this sort of higher energy going. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's very typical. Listen to almost any podcast, and you can kind of feel the energy of, that is part of why we were like, oh, let me listen to another one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a different vibe, and whereas an audiobook is generally more often like, let's settle in and have a story. So it makes complete sense, and I think that is true. um, well, different audiobooks are gonna have obviously different, they have different tone, just like any, print book, um, different tone, different vibes. So, some of them will be a little more high energy, and some of that's gonna, of course, depend on the narrator. And so, and I know people who say, "Oh, if I listen to an audiobook, I just fall asleep." And I've had people who have told me, there was a friend of mine, this is many years ago now, but he said, I can't listen to audiobooks because they always put me to sleep, and I want to listen while I'm driving. And I said, well, just do me a favor, just listen to one of mine. because and just let me know. And he came back. He said, "Wow, that was such a different experience," because I I I was like awake, alert. I really wanted to hear it. So the narrator makes a huge difference as well.
Yeah.
You know, um, yeah, and there's a full range. We've talked about how, some narrators are just not of at the level that we want them to
Right.
be. And but there are a tremendous number of really talented narrators. So there's a lot to pick through in selecting titles, and that's part of the world that we're in.
Right. And I think that's a really like using my son's example, but now like how you've put it into more descriptive words. Yes, audiobooks are more of the settle in, calm, right? There's also the sleep timer option for your friend or anyone else that does like to listen to fall asleep. So I will say I love that for if I'm on an airplane and my kids are resting, that's the only time that I feel like I can rest. But I will listen to an audiobook and sometimes fall asleep. Um, I love that you can listen in increments too. So you know what,
Yeah.
it's got 8 or 9 hours, right? But you're like, I'm going to listen and I'm going to take note and I'm going to soak it in. And there are still the times that I'm like, okay, 1 more hour of this podcast or this audiobook. I'm going to zoom through it. I've gotten the gist. This is all recap. But
Yeah.
again, it just depends a lot on the voice, how
Mhm.
I've been responding to it. And then, but when I get migraines, because I get them from time to time, I have one of those ice packs that just goes over, the eyes and everything. It's perfect. But I'm not able to sleep with it on because it's really cold, it's
Yeah.
frigid.
Yeah.
So that's one of my favorite times to put on an audiobook. I'll set up the
Mhm.
sleep timer. I know that I'm only going to have, the head ice pack on for about 15 to 20 minutes. I settle in, I put it at a slow speed. That's the other thing I like is you can change the speed on a podcast, but
Mhm.
on an audiobook, again, based on your narrator, you can get the feel for like, especially if you're trying to wind down, you don't want them reading at 1.75 or
Right.
2, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you want it more towards the 1.2 stage, and then you're able, in fact, for my son, I always set it to the 1.0 speed if
Uh-huh.
he gets up in the middle of the night. I don't want it, and he doesn't know how to toggle it yet, which is great.
Yeah.
When that happens, I will have some work to do because I think he'll think it's funny to speed it up. And then, yeah, be trying to do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, we're trying to settle down
Yeah.
back into, yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess the other thing too, it just depends. And I've asked my audience this from time to time too. Like you said, there's a lot higher energy at the podcast because it's like a set time and a shorter listen time. Generally, it's like the
Right.
drive to work. It's like, or maybe sometimes this podcast runs about 45 minutes. So it could be the drive to work and the drive back or whatever. It could be while you're running errands. I have seen people in grocery stores with the AirPod in,
Mhm.
personally for me, that's one of the things I cannot multitask well is be listening. Cause like if I want to take notes, I'm gonna have to stop right there in the grocery store, get the phone out, get the notepad out, and stop what I'm doing. It's the same reason why it's not good for me to be on the phone in the grocery store. It takes so much longer to come out of there with what I needed. And then there's always the token item I forgot. But like you said, there's a lot of things around the house I could be doing, cleaning, laundry. Oh man, laundry is like one of the best ones because it's very mindless to put a load in, take a load out of the dryer, be folding it.
Yeah.
And some people like to watch TV while they do that. And there are times that I might treat myself to it, but I'm just in general not really a screens person.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I love to read. There's very few shows that are so captivating to me that I just have to watch it every night. And then I feel like I'm getting old because I can't even sit through a movie anymore. Even with my cross stitch or something else, it's like, oh, I'm so tired. I'm gonna have to finish this tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it's usually an audiobook for me.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess too, going back a little bit, what would you say, like what tips and tricks do you, because your company like helps narrators record their audiobooks, right?
Yeah, we do all levels of production. That can be anything from a single narrator or an author narrator to full cast production, music, sound effects. Um, For kids' books, it's typically most often, sometimes it'll be more than one voice, but most often it's one voice and music and sound effects. And really, we're always looking at what's going to be best for this particular book. There are some books that are written with alternating perspectives, a different point of view from, different characters. Those are great in two voices or however many points of view are done that way. Um, we even do screenplays and that sort of thing, convert that into an audiobook, which is fun.
Cool.
Yeah. So in terms of like tips and tricks, I would say, first of all, it's really helpful to find your team. There are many of us that do audiobook production, and there are all different approaches to the process. But and I guess one thing I want to highlight in this regard, because it can be something that people fall into very commonly, because in the audiobook industry, the most typical cost basis, in other words, the way that they calculate the amount, is based on per finished hour. So
Oh,
many people don't understand, first of all, what that means, and then also what it can mean to the bottom line by the end of the project. So what it means is that no matter how long it takes the narrator to create that audiobook, so all narrators stumble, that's not, we all do. So,
right.
or you have the dog bark next door, you have to clear your throat, whatever it is. So no matter how long it takes you to actually get the finished book done, doesn't matter. What matters is what's the finished length of that audiobook.
Okay.
And so then most producers say, well, it's going to cost you, $600 per finished hour, whatever the amount is. Well, then here's the thing that most people don't recognize. Typically, they're going to give you some kind of estimated finished length, so you have a rough idea of what it will cost. And they most often do that without actually looking at your manuscript. So they don't really know what your
Mm,
manuscript rate is going to work out to be. They just use a sort of an industry middle of the road standard.
right.
Okay. So what can happen, and this is the biggest issue if you have a long book. So the longer your book is, the more at risk you are, because all it takes is for either the pace of your particular text, or the narrator just intentionally or not slows down. Suddenly
Right.
that quote can go way out of whack and you end up paying a lot more. So there are some, well, I don't know if there are other, I believe that there are probably other production companies that also, as we do, will offer a project price. I don't know of others, but I'll assume that there might be.
Right.
Um, and we have our own internal ways of making that work. So I think so that piece, just being aware of that. And then the other thing I would say is that pre-production, so the planning out, the preparation of the manuscript for recording, uh, what to do about front and back matter, all of those things can be really valuable, paying attention to that. And most production companies don't. They just, you give them your book and they say, okay, and we read it start to finish, and that's it. We pay a lot of attention to pre-production because um, there's there's a lot of potential gold for the author in that front matter and back matter and the way that it's laid out. And I won't dive down that rabbit hole because we could go on for hours talking about what kinds of things, but we're looking for, just as uh, a broad statement about the kinds of things that we're looking for in that manuscript are, how can we best leverage this audiobook such that the listener is going to want to continue to engage with the author, whether it's their next book or some other offering that they have. And there are things that can be done to make that more effective, and so we focus on that because if you get an audiobook, it's usually because you want something, you want something from that, right?
Right.
And so if you can get more of that thing, then that's a good thing for you as a listener. And it's also a good thing for the author. So it's really a win-win.
Right. Both
Mm.
sides are getting something there. And that's cool because I mean, it makes sense, but there's not maybe a one size fits all package like you're saying. It's
Right.
how long is it? How much, talent are we bringing in to produce your audiobook? And there's so many options out there too that it's just like cool. I mean, it's like if I ever get that self-help written,
Mhm.
I don't think I would read it, but I would maybe talk to like your company or whoever about the reading it and adding inflection in certain places where I'm like, hey, I want you to focus on joy. So this part needs to be joyful and not just if you want to feel joy, like Eeyore's voice, like no,
Oh,
we don't want,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. But I can see me just because of my personality when I read aloud, just getting that monotone going when
Mhm.
I'm trying to infuse joy. I want my voice
Yeah.
like to come through my writing. So, like you're saying, sometimes writers just need to be writers. I'm thankful for where I've been able to blend a little bit of my love of speaking, learning, reading, and writing onto this show.
Mhm.
But I do not feel like I have a professional career ahead of me in producing audiobooks, but I love listening to them. I hope
Yeah.
to produce one day, set it up, right? Work
Yeah.
with a company to do that. And it's just so neat. Like there's so much kind of to it that I didn't realize. So like, I almost feel like too, this is one of the first times I've talked to anybody in the audiobook industry. So that's really been fun for me today.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one other thing I want to highlight, and that is it's regarding distribution. Um, because we put a lot of love, a lot of heart, a lot of money into the process of
Mhm.
creating the audiobook.
Right.
And then getting it out there into the world is that next step, right?
Mhm.
So we help authors, get them out into the broad distribution channels in all the places that you would think of off the top of your head, and many, many more. Um, but there has always been, until very recently, there has always been kind of, it's like been behind the wall. Like authors don't have control over really anything. When it comes to pricing or
Right.
the
Oh no.
information, the metadata, or being able to, hey, run a promotion or do discount codes, or like know who actually bought your audiobook so that you can follow up with them and
Right.
build community with them.
Build a
And
community. Exactly.
yeah. And so this has been something that's frustrated me for many years. And our company, Pro Audio Voices, has finally been in a position where we've been able to create a platform so that authors can sell their audiobooks directly. And that it's sort of like the Etsy of audiobooks, right? So that they
Yeah.
can, yeah, they can set their own pricing. They can run promotions, do discount codes, know who bought their audiobook, and really have a team to support them in that whole process. So it's a real game changer in the industry, and it's not to replace, but when we're out there marketing our audiobooks, you and any format really, we're always directing traffic. That's what it's all about. Yeah, buy it over here.
Hmm.
So when authors direct their their audience to buy their audiobooks on Amplify Audiobooks, then they're going to be able to, really build those relationships and to have the control that they really deserve. So we're
Right.
pre-
And you
we're
know what?
really
I
excited about it.
I was going to say, I really appreciate that, just my perspective, because you can lose a fair amount of control and autonomy as an author as you're going through the publishing process. It depends on how you decide to publish, but even
Right.
just the actual publishing process.
Hmm.
If you're going to do traditional or hybrid, you're not going to have full control like you would if you're self publishing. That being said, it's still your work, right? You
Right.
spend so much time on it that you could scream, and then you want it to really represent, like you want it to go out in the world. One of my problems is it's never really done because I have this OCD and perfectionism issue, but I'm like,
Mm.
there was a point with Sophie Stands Out that I said, if I don't get it out in the world, there's going to be more guilt on my part for that happening than me getting it out and maybe there being an error or a mistake. Because there were some things once it got published, it was like, yeah, that's okay. It's our first book,
Yeah.
my illustrator and I, and things like that. But I was like, well, if I hadn't published it, what if I was still sitting on it? And here I am trying to get my next manuscript published, and I'm going to start writing for a new publishing company. I would not be there if I was still sitting on this.
Right.
So there's that perspective too. But if you have a company that will help walk you through it, and if you're wanting to make it into that, audiobook connection and production, then I don't know. That just like that really is nice to be able to still have that sense of control and that connection to your work, that
Yes.
what you
Yeah.
intended for it to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we love that whole collaborative process with authors, and the narrators, we really treat it as we're all working together.
Right.
Let's bring it forward in the way that, to achieve your goals and help you, bring your message forward. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's so cool. Becky, thank you so much for your time today. I'm just so intrigued. I'm excited. I'm going to work really hard to get this edited and get it out there quickly in a couple weeks. But I just one more time before we close off here, would you mind mentioning your podcast and like if you have a website that goes with it? That way our listeners can tune in.
Yeah. Yeah. So our business website is proaudiovoices.com. And you can also find Amplify Audiobooks, both in the app stores and then also at amplifyaudiobooks.com. So that's great for all listeners out there. And then the podcast is Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. And the best way to find it is actually to go to Pro Audio Voices, and it's on the website in the media tab.
Cool. Okay. See, that's cool. I'm actually glad I asked that because I'm interested in looking it up and listening. That all the behind the scenes part of it is just fascinating to me. But it's good to know that that's the easiest way to locate it. And there we go. We've got it
Yeah.
on the air. And when I put out the show notes as well, it'll be there. So thank you so
Right.
much, Becky. It's been a real
Thank
pleasure
you.
today.
Likewise. Thank you. Really
You
appreciate it.
bet. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll be in touch soon. Take care.
Okay. Sounds good.
Talk
You
to
too.
you later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.